doing on this course is exploring six core teachings of meditation, six fundamental principles of meditation. And the first thing to say is that when I say six core teachings, six fundamental principles, I'm thinking in terms of Buddhist meditation. Lots of different kinds of meditations, both religious and secular. I think the Christian tradition and secular increasingly mindfulness is big, isn't it? I teach mindfulness-based cognitive therapy downstairs. So what I'm wanting to do primarily on this course is try to see what are the core teachings of Buddhist meditation. Yeah? So I'm also very aware that there's a real range of people in the room. Some of you are very new indeed, but some of you have been meditating for a long time, off and on, sometimes more off than on. A few more people coming in. Hi there, it's all right. So I'll somehow try, and Shraddha will somehow try and talk to the... Hello, hidden behind the flowers. Try and talk to the whole room. But that's primarily what I'm doing. I'm trying to, and Shraddha trying to introduce you to six core teachings of Buddhist meditation. Yeah? Now, having said that, I'm really aware, just from the group I was in just before the tea break, a lot of people come along to meditate, to calm down, to relax. Increasingly, people are turning to meditation for well-being. I teach MBCT downstairs, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy for depression. Mindfulness is becoming a major force in life at the moment. I mean, you never know quite how long these things last, but increasingly it's being used in schools, it's being used in the corporate world, it's being used for health, it's being used for addiction. So I want to try and make those transitions from, you might well have been coming for one of those courses, or you might well have been coming along just to meditate and relax, and because you sort of vaguely thought that would help. So it might sound a bit sort of scary. So now we're doing this Buddhist meditation thing, which, is going to be a bit weird. I should wear a big yellow hat or something, just to frighten you. And I want to actually start this evening with the first principle, which I want to call very simply the view. Couldn't think of a better title for it. It's not actually terribly good because view sounds like your opinion. People say about people's views. It often means your opinion, your take on something, your ideology even. And by the view, capitalised, I don't mean that. I don't mean those things. What I want to try and talk about this evening, if I can, is what the Buddhist view of meditating is. What the sort of world vision that it comes out of. To do that, I'll need to try and say something about the world vision that we might have. Because the world vision, the kind of framing that we meditate in, it changes the experience. So if you sit down to meditate, to cultivate relaxation, that's that might be a different thing. It might actually not be, but it might be a different thing that if you were sat down to meditate to gain enlightenment. Depending on what your view is, it'll open up certain aspects of your experience and close down certain aspects of your experience. Yeah? So I want to try and sort of talk about what this Buddhist view is. Actually, already now I started talking, I'm thinking, oh my God, fancy starting here. Anyway, let's have a go. So let's start with a story because they're a bit easier. So I was reading a sutra, which is an ancient story about the Buddha. I won't go into all the history of that. It's a very, very old story. And in this story, a king, he has become a king by murdering his father. So as you can imagine, he's got an uneasy conscience. He's troubled. He's a king, he's a very rich king. He's got everything he wants, but he has this horrible sense of something wrong. Yeah. So what he does, he's a very pragmatic kind of man. He wants to find out what this spiritual life lark is about. And he wants to see what are the what's the benefits of practicing a spiritual life? I don't tend to use this term spiritual life anymore, but we'll use it for now, just as shorthand. What's the benefit for? What's the good of it? For him, he's thinking, well, I'm really rich. I've got everything I want. I've got a palace. According to the story, he's got 100 wives, which, there you go. He's got 100 wives. So we're in a bit of a land of myth, I think. So he's got everything he wants. It's in ancient India, which was kind of rife with all kinds of different, sort of spiritual groups, really, like just rife with them. So he's wanting to know what the benefits of it are. He meets various teachers. They try and tell him, and he's not convinced. He's not really convinced that there's much to it. It just feels like words, and that's something very important. That so easily, so-called spiritual life is just a sort of just more words, just nice-sounding words. And he's obviously an intelligent man who could see that. Yeah? And then one night, according to this story, it's a moonlit night, full moon night, and a really beautiful evening. And obviously, even though he's done this terrible thing, he has this sense that this is a really beautiful evening. I've got actually everything I want. I've got the kingdom. I did bad things to get it, but I've got it. Why can't I just enjoy this beautiful evening? Why can't I just be here now? I can't enjoy it. He feels sort of troubled. And so he asks, well, isn't there a teacher that we can go and see tonight? I mean, the reason why I think it comes from is that, the full moon night would be the night that you would travel because you could see. So there you go, it's a beautiful full moon night. Isn't there someone I can go and talk to that will help me enjoy this beautiful full moon night? This could be just as true for us. We're like the king. We've probably got pretty much everything we want. We live like Renaissance princes, don't we? And interestingly, his physician, which I find sort of symbolically interesting, suggests that he goes to see the Buddha, who's nearby with his disciples. Suggests he goes to see the Buddha. Personally, I think that might be a symbol that his physician suggests it. There's something wrong. The metaphor is there's something wrong, and your doctor says, I know a good doctor, basically. I know somebody who can help you. And he says, I know someone who can put your heart at ease. I'm sure he'll be able to. Yeah. So the king, I better keep this story fairly quick. The king, they're nice stories, aren't they? The king goes off on his elephants, as you do. We've all done that. With his 100 wives. They all go off in a big train into the forest to meet the Buddha. And what, again, I find slightly... I read these stories symbolically as one... one never knows the real history, but what's striking to me is they all go off in their finery. They get to the forest, and of course by the time they get to the forest, it's just too dense to go through. So they have to dismount, they have to get off the elephants. They have to walk the rest of the way. And isn't that an interesting metaphor? They have to leave behind what for us would be their Lamborghinis and their gorgeous outfits, because they'll get ripped as they go through. I imagine the women having to take their finery off, the men have to get off the elephants. You have to actually just approach the Buddha on foot. Very, very human image. You can't go on to meet the Buddha on an elephant. So I want to say that here, that you can't come to this room on your elephant. Which is mean, whatever your elephant is, your elephant of status, of importance, of financial security, of success, you have to get off your elephant, as do I, and come here in your bare feet. Here we are now. We haven't got our shoes on. It's almost like it relates to the king having to get off his elephant. For us, that symbol is having to take off our shoes, and we're just here together as ordinary human beings, as persons. Yeah, you can't approach the Buddha without taking your shoes off, without getting off the elephant. You can't approach the Buddha with all your kind of accoutrements of life. Yeah? You have to get off all that and walk, just like everybody else. In other words, there's no status, there's no hierarchy. You have to walk. The king has to walk. And then, according to tradition, the physician is saying he's meditating in the forest with his hundreds, thousands of disciples. But of course, the king gets more and more worried because he can't hear anything. He's told that I think it's like 1,000 disciples meditating with the Buddha. You can't hear a thing. This is a dead of night. And so he starts to think it's a trap, that he's being led into a trap, because he's got this very uneasy conscience. And what happens, of course, is the physician, interestingly, says, no, don't worry, I know they're here, they will be there in a minute. And then they go through into a clearing, and there they all are. The Buddha sitting in the midst. I mean, that's why we have this figure here, sitting in the midst of the assembly, meditating. And everyone was completely silent. So no one moved in the meditation, just utter silence. And the king was incredibly struck by it. And interestingly, the first thought that came to his mind is, I hope my son could experience something of this calm. Actually, as the story goes later on, his son ends up killing him. But that's another story. So that didn't work. But yeah, he wants his son to experience his calm. He's very, obviously, in the story, he's deeply moved by this incredible scene of peace. When you think himself, his mind is anything but peaceful, he suddenly enters this world of incredible peace. And he talks to the Buddha and he says to the Buddha, what are the benefits of spiritual practice? And the Buddha tells him, and he's convinced. But in a way, what I wanted to highlight is that first of all, he actually sees the benefit straight away. He doesn't need to be told at first. The Buddha does tell him and go through a long list of things in the sutra. But the first thing is he feels this atmosphere. He goes in, this is what I want. This is what I want my son to have. I want some of this. Sometimes people even have a bit of a sense of that coming to the Buddhist center. They don't quite know what it is, but there's a sort of atmosphere. There's something here that feels like, I want something of that. You can't quite even say what it is, but you want something of it. A sort of, an atmosphere, something that you can feel directly. And then, according to the first thing that the Buddha says is, once you hear the teachings of the Dharma, you have what Buddhism calls Shraddha. You experience Shraddha. Shraddha is usually translated as faith, but it's probably best translated as confidence, trust. You have confidence trust that there is much more to life than you think. Yeah? So this is what I'm wanting to say is the view. That there is much more to life than you think. And that it is accessible to you. It is in your power to experience much more. That your everyday consciousness, like I was mentioning in the announcement, your everyday consciousness isn't it. It's not a question of merely polishing up, improving, restoring your personality, your everyday personality that you try to keep together and which you feel strangely isn't going to stay together, if you see what I mean. So the view is this sense of that there's something much more to life. And that more is symbolized by the Buddha figure. Some people relate to this figure, some people don't. Don't sort of worry about that too much. It symbolizes a kind of mystical more. The figure symbolizes that consciousness can become like this. It can have this kind of majesty. It can arise sitting on a moon mat. It's supposed to be sitting on the full moon. And that you think of the full moon, the beauty of the full moon. Think of a figure sitting on a full moon that's lying on the stamens of a lotus flower, and this figure is gold and completely radiant. And what that image is trying to say is this could be yours. This is available to the human being. This is what human beings can become. Yeah. The Buddha isn't a god. The Buddha isn't any kind of deity. There's no supernatural force. He can't save you or and so on. What the figure represents is your own mind at its absolute deepest. If you could just work with the sort of algae that lies on the top of the mind. Later on in the course, I want to talk about the what I call the hindrances, which are the word for hindrances is in the Pali. Excuse me. Excuse me. Is niranavas, which means coverings, and traditionally the metaphor there is that your mind is vast and infinite, but it's covered over by stuff. It's got coverings, and what we're trying to do is drop beneath those coverings of the mind into the vast, limitless expanse of consciousness. Yeah. The problem is that we get addicted to the surface. Yeah. Most of our mental work, most of our mental states, our ruminative states, are planning, fantasizing, remembering, worrying, arguing in our head, is us being addicted to the surface of our mind, which is largely a narrative we tell ourselves, a self-justifying or even self-problematizing narrative that we tell ourselves again and again to keep on deciding that we are a me. And the Buddha's just saying, well, that's just at the top of consciousness. All you need to do is sink below that. And what you find is that consciousness is a bit like this. And eventually you can live in that consciousness. Yeah? So that's the Buddhist view of meditation, that there is much more to you than you think, that consciousness, your consciousness, right now is infinite, radiant, that this image is an image for your mind without any supernatural help, without a God coming in and touching you, that your mind is like this, can be like this, but that we get caught up, entangled in stories about me, in what a friend of mine has been calling the narrative self, our narrative self. We get caught up in that narrative self and live through that narrative self and start to think of that narrative self, stories about how good I am, what I'm like in relationship to you, whether you like me or not, am I a good person, a bad person, if I'm like this, will you get into me or not? That narrative self, we start to think, is reality, is the depth of it all. And all we can do is polish that up, get it better, get a better narrative, and that's really all we can expect. There is value in improving our narrative, but what the Buddhist message is that actually you're trying to improve it so you can see through it and see to a much larger consciousness. Yeah? So a Buddhist view of meditating is sitting down in the cushions with this view. So by view I mean this kind of instinct, this belief patterning, this inner sense that there is so much to life. There is so much to me just now. My consciousness is infinitely explorable, interesting, will open up infinitely if I learn how to work with it. Yeah. Do you see how different that would be if you sat down every day and you basically had that view, that this was your mind and that all it was covered over. In the Zen tradition, they just talk about dust falling on a mirror, and that all you're trying to do is just wipe off the dust, and then you've got this mirror that reflects everything. Yeah? So, what I needed to say then is that often we don't have that view, and we don't know we don't have that view. Does this mean? We've all got a view about life. You can't live without one, and usually you won't notice it. So, for instance, in the Buddha's time, the common view was that somehow you go on forever. There was a nihilistic trend in ancient India. There were some people who were called annihilationists who taught that when you die, that was the end, nothing else. But it was less common. The more common thing was that somehow you live forever, you went to heaven, you propitiated the gods, that kind of stuff. Our current view is, oh no, all of that is superstition. There's no gods, there's no angels, there's nobody out there to help you, there's no supernatural agencies, there's nothing actually. All that's just sort of stories, which we're now too sophisticated for. What we've got is birth, nothing before birth, and death, and nothing after death. And we've got nothing above the life that we live. There's no transcending possibility. So all I can do with my life is try and do that really well. Be nice to people, have as much pleasure as I can, dance until the lights go out. How you could talk about that simply is that probably many of us have got a nihilistic view that actually self, my consciousness, the everyday consciousness that I experience is life, is me, that's all there is, and that when I die, that ends and there's nothing else. Yeah? We won't even know we've got that view, but very often that is our view. Yeah? Almost inevitably nowadays. It's often more complicated because there's so many different strands, but I need to keep it simple, otherwise we won't meditate. So what we've got often is liberal humanism. And so liberal humanism is basically the idea that, okay, there's nobody out there to help you, there's no one to pray to, there's nothing supernatural. So what you've got is this human life that starts and ends. So the best thing we can do is do that really well, with good governance, with kindness to each other, with good behaviour. We can all make this short life we've got as good as possible. Yeah? That's the kind of liberal humanist view. And most of us has probably got a view something like that. And you see how meditation fits into that. So, okay, one of the ways in which I can live this life of mine in a good way, that's, so I don't want to be stressed all the time, I don't want to be arguing with my friends all the time in my mind, I don't want to be going through traumas of my childhood all the time. Meditation can help me with all that. I don't want to keep on getting into this depressive cycle all the time. Meditation can help you with all that. And it really can. But what the Buddhist view would be, or what the Buddha would say, is that liberal humanist view that we've got without noticing it is actually limiting us. It's actually too small for us, too small for psyche, as it were, too small for consciousness. It's a really good thing. It's much better having a genuinely liberal human view than, I don't know, a fascist view or all kinds of other views, including superstitious views. Superstition has actually caused an awful lot of suffering. Old ladies used to be killed because people were superstitious, used to be burned, and actually relatively recently, historically. So superstitions are often extremely dangerous. So what Buddhism is trying to say is that there's something else. So it's saying you don't go on forever in heaven or hell. You don't have a soul, for instance. There's not a little bit of you, like a little thumb-sized bit of you that is just you, that goes on forever, that goes up to heaven or goes down to hell or gets reborn or gets reincarnated. But neither is it true that when you die, that's it, the end. The Buddha actually seemed to think that was worse. He said that the eternalist view, that you live forever, was wrong, misguided, unhelpful, various epithets. And then he said the nihilist view that when you die, that's the end. He said that was wrong, misguided, unhelpful, but he also added ugly, which is interesting. He doesn't use that for eternal. He thought it was ugly. So I think it's rather striking. I was talking to a friend of mine about a funeral just at supper, and he was talking about, he comes from a Hindu background. There was a Hindu funeral. He's not a Hindu, but he was saying it was really lovely to have that ritual, compared with times when he's just gone to a crematorium. There's been no ritual, and all you've got is this automatic curtain. And in that moment, you really see that liberal humanism doesn't answer to that. It can't help you at all. What you've got is a box that's going to have to be burned and an automatic curtain. there's no reason for a ritual because you can't have a ritual because we've decided all that superstitious nonsense. Does it mean you can really see why ritual is so important? So what the Buddha's trying to say is there's this other place that's not the yes of eternalism, we go on forever, and not the no of nihilism, and that you can experience it. You can go to this place. If you see what I mean, there is more to life. There's more to your consciousness. You can become a Buddha, something that goes beyond the dichotomy of secular or religious. It's not secular and it's not religious. It's not religious in the usual sense, but it's certainly not secular either, in the usual sense, which is that moment at death where nobody knows what to say and all you've got is an automatic curtain. It's not like that. Yeah? So I want to try and give us, before we meditate, it's all very well, but how do we actually get closer to, it all sounds, you think, well, that sounds nice, I'd like to be a Buddha, but how do we actually get closer to it in experience? So I'll start with this today and then hopefully carry on next week. So the way I want to suggest that we do that in experience, it sounds a bit counterintuitive, is first thing we need to do is start to be much more honest with ourselves, much more conscious that somewhere or another we feel dissatisfied. That just now, even at this Buddhist centre, even though you've come on this course and I'm marvellous, there's a little part of you that's dissatisfied. Things in this ordinary life of ours, this human life of ours, this everyday consciousness, it always leaves you with a sense that isn't there more than this? Is this it? Is this it? Yeah? Just this sense that under our successes, under our achievements, if we're honest with ourselves, there's a funny hollow feeling. Like that feeling when you, in the days when people used to watch television all the time, you turn it off, it goes a little white dot, for those of you who are old enough to remember, and you have this horrible sense of, this sort of sense of vacuity, of, that didn't actually do anything. You go back to this funny sense of something missing, something unsatisfied, something that wants something, but it hasn't been delivered. You come back from your holiday of your lifetime, you show your friends your photographs, and you think, yeah, but here am I back to work? That sense, yeah. It's got a posh Buddhist word which is dukkha, but you don't need to worry about that. It's just this sense that if you're genuine with yourself, if you genuinely notice your experience and honest with yourself about your experience, something in it doesn't feel quite right. It's not enough. Doesn't quite work. There's a sort of slight hollowness. Sometimes you can slightly feel that, do I really exist in the way that other people do? Everybody else seems so confident. Do you ever have that? I do so often. I meet these people, they seem so confident and like they know what they think, and I just sort of think, should I feel? How come I can't feel like that? A bit of yourself that doesn't really work, that doesn't feel like it's enough. Yeah. Curiously, and what modern life does is it says to you, don't worry, folks, you can just buy something, and you can just buy something just by moving your thumb. A moment for me was I was on my train, and it said, I was reading my book on my whatever they call it, Kindle, and then it said, do you want to go to the Kindle store? I thought, no one's looking. So I went to the Kindle store, and it said, here's some books you might like. I thought, that is a book I'd like. I said, I'm not going to buy it. I'm ridiculous. I'm much too spiritual. Then it said, would you like to read an extract? I thought, well, there's nothing wrong with reading an extract. So you can do pray. That's all I did, like that. And then my extract. And I read the extract. I thought, that's really good. Would you like to buy it? And before that, I'd bought a book on the train, speeding to Cornwall. But really, probably underneath all that was that moment on the train. You settle, you put your bag up. You read your goodly magazine or whatever it is. But that sense of comes to the surface again, like a grease stain under paint. If you have a stain on the wall and you paint over it, the stain just comes through again. If you settle a moment, and if you're attentive, that sort of not quite rightness, the stain comes through again. And of course modern life just says you just buy something, and modern life has sorted it so that just when you're getting bored of the thing you've just bought, it brings out a new version of it, doesn't it? So whether it's Chanel number 7 or iPhone number 26, just when you got bored with the apps you were playing with, a new one comes out. I'm sure they must have studied it. It just stops you ever really noticing that this life of ours is unsatisfactory. It doesn't give you the satisfaction you want. And the Buddhists would say that's like essential that you be with that. You need to cherish that feeling, not as a thought about that feeling, but just that feeling of dissatisfaction. It doesn't actually necessarily mean suffering. It doesn't mean that your life's not going well. Your life can be going very well, but if you sit quietly in a room with your eyes closed, if you're honest with yourself, arising slowly is this feeling of dissatisfaction. And the Buddha would say, well, the first thing is to just see if you can turn towards that feeling. Directly turn towards it in your mind and your heart. Can you be with it without pressing your thumb to buy something? Well, in a way, that's one of the great reasons why we have meditation class, because it's much more difficult to buy something. Much more difficult. Do you want to shop in a Kindle store? You have, good manners mean you have to sit here at least until I ring a bell. So what I want us to do in the meditation is just see if you can feel that sense of dissatisfaction. What does it actually feel like? And it's very different. I don't mean thought, although even your thought will create a feeling of dissatisfaction. You know that time when you're thinking, what's wrong with me? Why am I not happy? If you tend to depression, for instance, that thought will make me feel uncomfortable, unsatisfied, something's wrong. So can you just feel that feeling of something's wrong without trying to solve it, without trying to improve it, without trying to get something to take it away? If you can stay with it long enough, with a kind of interested, this is a teaching of my consciousness here. This is something vital in my life, actually, counterintuitive though it is. If I can stay with it long enough, something can start to change without you trying to change it. Because in that dissatisfaction is a longing for more. The Buddha would say it's a longing for this. It's a longing to be completely fulfilled. And without being completely fulfilled, you feel its absence. You feel there's something missing. A little bit like a seed might feel the absence of its flowering, if you see what I mean. That's our existential situation. We're not an apple rotten at the core. We're a seed that needs to flower. And without flowering, you feel the absence of it. And it shows up to you, shows up to me as something not quite right, something missing. So do you see how staying with that feeling of something not quite right, something missing, is the key to that? Because when you feel that more, without trying to make anything happen, you're getting a bit closer to this longing for something more, this longing for something genuine, this longing for something integral, this longing for a deeper life, which you have already. You didn't need Buddhism to talk to you about that. So what we're going to do is we're going to meditate now, and I'm going to lead us through it a little bit. And what I want you to do in your meditations for this week is try to keep coming back to this sense of dissatisfaction. And it's a physical sense. It's not a head sense. It's not a thought, I'm not satisfied, I wish I had an elephant. It's a feeling of that, of not quite enough. Okay, so let's set ourselves up for meditation.